What's going on, everybody? I'm Anthony Servino with the Face Off Sports Network with my top fantasy football waiver wire additions for NFL Week 10. Let's get into it with one of my favorite running backs, maybe my favorite ad of the week. That's Ray Davis. This is what player I was all in on. I drafted a ton of him because I play volume, and he got off to a slow start. A lot of it because James Cook is off to one of the best years, if not the best year of his NFL career. But Ray Davis, we've seen in 3 of the past 4 games, his trajectory is on the rise with at least 11.7 PPR points in 3 of those matchups, including 2 games over 17. What's important to note that in week 6 against the Jets, he had extended time playing 36 offensive snaps with 23 touches and over 150 total yards without a touchdown. But in these other 2 games in which he gave us double-digit PPR points, his snap share was 12 and 8. Let's focus on last week against Miami. He played 8 snaps, but garnered a touch in 6 of them, taking them for 90 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Even back in week 7, with 12 touches, he went 5 for 41 with a touchdown in that game. So what are we doing with Ray Davis? Because you can look at these numbers and say, maybe I plug him in and I get lucky. He's not playing enough snaps for you to put him in a flex spot if you're in a bind. He just isn't. We're relying on big plays and touchdowns. But when it comes to, does he have big time value if James Cook goes down? The answer is absolutely yes. We've seen him get the volume in week 6 against the Jets. And I get that Ty Johnson is still there, but the primary handcuff to James Cook in this prolific offense is Ray Davis. Down the stretch, this is a player I want on my team. He has a 21.3 broken tackle rate. He is being targeted on 28.2% of the routes. The metrics are off the charts. He's getting a touch on 61.7% of the snaps. Buffalo obviously knows his value. Plus, his role could expand if they want to preserve James Cook down the stretch. Let's go to my next ad, and that is Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston, we know he's not a volume player. But this past week, he had his second spike week of the year back in week 2. Remember, he goes for 22.1 PPR points, scores 2 touchdowns, goes for 51 yards on 5 receptions this past week. Another 22 PPR points, 4 or 5 targets for 118 and 1. He's essentially the new Mike Williams in this offense, but in all but 1 game, he's had fewer than 5 targets. He's not the target guy. This is a low-volume passing attack. There isn't going to be many targets to go around. What's important is what he does with those targets. Now, while he's getting 12.5% of the team targets, that is 58th percentile amongst qualifying wide receivers using the tools on rotowire.com. When he is running a route, he is being targeted 25.7% of the time, which is 87th percentile. And he's also averaging 8.3 yards after the catch, which is 97th percentile. So when he does get opportunities, he is cashing in on them. Now, I want a piece of Quentin Johnston. We know there's not a lot of competition in that wide receiver room. Outside of really Lad McConkey, we're seeing Will Dissly getting involved a little bit. We saw James Palmer getting involved a little bit, but this is a former first-round pick. He has a draft pedigree. He has a talent. And while this is a run-first defensive team, we're seeing the Chargers throw the football a little bit more, and this offense is starting to click. In the past 4 games, Justin Herbert has thrown the ball at least 32 times, 3 times. So we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in passing volume, which is great for Quentin Johnston. Next up, Khalil Herbert. And this is a late addition, which is why I don't have a pretty graphic for it. Khalil Herbert was just traded, as we expected, only to the Cincinnati Bengals. Well, let's go to the Y and Zach Moss. He's expected to miss the rest of the regular season with a neck injury. And Khalil Herbert, who's been buried on Chicago's depth chart, now enters a situation where he's likely the number 2 running back, replacing Moss in his role. Now, we know Chase Brown is the number 1. In fact, Chase Brown might be a back-end RB1, high-end RB2 moving forward, but we also know that there are touches to be had in this prolific Bengals offense. It might take Khalil Herbert a week to get correlated or to get acclimated in this offense. The Bengals playing a short week. They get the Ravens on Thursday Night Football. If Khalil Herbert's active, I don't know how much run he will get, but moving forward, I would, if you were rostering Moss, because he was rostered everywhere, you want to roster Khalil Herbert. I do believe Herbert's or Chase Brown's the guy, but there should be some touches left over if you're in a bind to need a running back for Khalil Herbert to be used in a bind in your flex spot. Let's go to my next player we are adding. That is Ray McCloud. Now, Ray McCloud could see extended volume because of the Drake London injury. It's not serious, but it could cause Drake London to potentially miss a game. And Ray McCloud has been solid this year. He's had 3 games with over 11.2 PPR points. He's also getting decent volume. Now, he's cooled off in the past 4 games, but earlier this season, he had 3 games with over 7 targets. Let's be real here. The direct replacement for Drake London, if he misses time, is Cardaro Hodge. But do we trust Cardaro Hodge? He had that 1 walk-off touchdown in overtime against the Buccaneers a few weeks ago. Otherwise, we don't know much about him. He might get the starter reps if Drake London loses time, but I do think the uptick in volume could go to Ray McCloud, which is why I prioritize him over Hodge. Let's go to our next ad, Adam Thielen. Now, this is a player who's expected to be activated off IR. In fact, he has been activated. He just did not play last week. Adam Thielen is older. By the time you watch this video, he could be traded from the Carolina Panthers. We don't know. But if he is retained by the Panthers, I do think once he returns, which could be this week, he's going to have fantasy value. Why? Because if you remember last year, Adam Thielen was a quiet stud. And I'll say stud for where we drafted him last year with Bryce Young on the field. Bryce Young hyper-targeted and focused on Adam Thielen. And while Thielen is 34 years old, he doesn't have a lot of gas in the tank. If he gets the volume like last year from Bryce Young, then he could return some solid high-floor fantasy weeks. Remember this year, earlier, before he suffered the injury, his best game, he did produce 13 PPR points in week 3 before suffering the injury in week 4. He went 3 for 40 with a touchdown. He left the game early, and we haven't seen him since. If we get Bryce Young, even if we get Andy Dalton, I do see a world where he is a legitimate fantasy producer down the stretch. They have good matchups, and despite the good matchups, this is a team that normally gets their butts kicked, and they're trailing, which means they have to throw the football, which means more targets for weapons like Adam Thielen, Leggett, and Coker, and they just traded Mingo, so that's one less mouth to feed. We are adding Adam Thielen. Let's go to another wide receiver, Jalen Tolbert. We don't know what's going on with CeeDee Lamb. It is an AC joint sprain. It could mean he misses a game. Maybe he misses no time. Maybe he misses multiple games. This is a team that is going down fast in Dallas. And the fact that they just traded for Jonathan Mingo tells me maybe CeeDee Lamb, who knows? They lost Dak Prescott, headed to IR. Maybe they pull the plug on this season and deactivate CeeDee Lamb at some point. Jalen Tolbert, I get Brandon Cooks is coming back. I get they brought in Mingo. Jalen Tolbert has a realistic chance to pop the rest of the way. In fact, if CeeDee Lamb misses time, I believe Jalen Tolbert will operate as the de facto number one wide receiver. This is a team that they have some good matchups down the stretch. I'm not expecting the prolific Dallas offense. We haven't seen it this year anyway. They have Cooper Rush, but the targets are going to go somewhere. Even with CeeDee Lamb on a field, there's a world where Jalen Tolbert still sees some solid volume. They struggle to run the ball. Their defense is not good. It will be getting healthier once Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence comes back. But again, this Dallas season is lost. And I do think there's a world where, hey, let's see what we have for the future. Let's give guys like Jalen Tolbert, who's been playing well and has seen extended snaps. Let's see if he is the real deal. Let's see next year when we're good to go again, if he's good enough to start in 2 wide sets. So I'm picking up Jalen Tolbert, who is coming off of a decent game, 3 for 19, a touchdown, his 4th game over double-digit PPR points this year. And he played a season high 70 snaps. So again, he looks like the guy in this wide receiver room. Let's go to Mike Gesicki. Now, there's a disclaimer with Mike Gesicki. It seems like there's a correlation. Mike Gesicki pops when T. Higgins is not on the field. We've seen this a few times this year. Back in week 1, Gesicki, 3 for 18 on 4 targets. One of those targets was a touchdown that was called back. Week 2 against KC, he goes off for 16.1 PPR points, 7 of 9 for 91. He goes 4 for 47 against Washington when T. Higgins didn't return that week. Now, the past 2 games with T. Higgins sidelined against Philly, 7 for 73 on 8 targets, 14 PPR points. Last week against Vegas, 5 for 10 and 2 touchdowns, or 5 for 100 and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. You see where I'm going here. When T. Higgins is out, Mike Gesicki is being used as possibly the number 2 pass catcher in this offense. A couple of issues here. Again, if T. Higgins comes back this week, despite a good matchup against Baltimore on Thursday, I don't know if I like Mike Gesicki. But as long as T. Higgins is sidelined, you can throw him in your fantasy lineups confidently. In fact, even if Higgins returns, which could happen, there's also a chance that he gets hurt again. He's one of the most injury volatile players in fantasy football. So I want to pick up Gesicki and stash him on my bench for those games that Higgins misses. Right now, Gesicki, 12.4% of the targets for a somewhat part-time player. That's 73th percentile at tight end. But when he is on the field, talked about this earlier, Quentin Johnston, he's being targeted on 24.5% of the routes he is running, which is 87th percentile at his position. He's also running fairly deep. His average depth of target is 8.3 yards, and he's averaging 2.4 yards per route run while getting 15.1% of his team air yards. He's a really good player. He just needs the opportunity, and he's been outstanding. With T. Higgins sideline, we're picking up Mike Gesicki, and again, we're using him with confidence. If T. Higgins is down at any point the rest of the way, Demario Douglas, Pop Douglas has been outstanding in games with Drake May on the football field. In the past few games since week 5, he's gone for double-digit PPR points 3 times, including this past week against Tennessee, where he goes 7 of 9 targets for a meager 35 yards. But in PPR, those 7 receptions count. In fact, in those 3 matchups, he's had 9 targets. Let's scale it back. Since week 3, he's had 4 games of double-digit PPR points. All of those games, he's had 9 targets. So when Pop Douglas gets the volume, he's at least returning a high floor. We're expecting Drake May to be the guy the rest of the way. I don't love this matchup. If you look at the remaining schedule for the Patriots, Pop Douglas, and this passing attack, it is not favorable. But the volume's going to go somewhere. And Demario Douglas, he keeps looking like the wide receiver in this offense that you want to roster. And I think May is only going to get better as the season goes on, which is a good sign for Pop Douglas. Let's go to Justice Hill. I get it. Keaton Mitchell, he's activated. We can also throw him in the mix. If Keaton Mitchell is available, he's not going to get a lot of run, but we know he has his moments where he pops. He's not really a usable fantasy asset, but if you're in a deep league or a deep bench league, I want Keaton Mitchell. But let's focus on Justice Hill. Derrick Henry might be the guy, but Justice Hill is the primary receiver out of the backfield. This is a volatile player because we don't know when they're going to hyper target him. We've seen him used a few times this year where he's gotten 6 and 8 targets. He's returned immense fantasy value. Even a few weeks ago against Tampa, he was only targeted 3 times, but took him 3 for 44 and a touchdown. This past week, 3 for 3 for 43 yards, no touchdown, but still gives us a high 8.8 floor. This is not a player I want to use in my fantasy lineups because he just doesn't get enough run or touches. But if you're in a bind, you can do a lot worse than using Justice Hill in this high-powered offense. And you can really dig a little bit deeper. I feel like if there are games where they're playing a good defense, we're going to see some trickery out of this offense. A lot of this trickery comes from Justice Hill and the way that they employ him as an extra receiver. Let's start winding down Taysom Hill. We're going to add Taysom Hill because the Saints are a mess. The Saints moved off of Dennis Allen. The Saints, who knows when Chris Olave is coming back? Shaheed was lost a long time ago. This team is all sorts of banged up. Even Kendre Miller was placed on IR. They're in need of bodies. And one of the better bodies that they have that can do a lot of things and do a lot of things pretty damn good is Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill last week totals 60 yards, and he scored a touchdown against Carolina. A few weeks ago, before suffering injury in week 4, he had a pair of touchdowns on 24 yards rushing. I see a world where Taysom Hill is going to be an active part of this offense, and he's going to play some snaps. In fact, the past 2 games, he's played at least 27 snaps. I don't see that going down because it's a team, again, they need bodies. Look at this wide receiver room outside of Chris Olave, Cedric Wilson. It isn't above means. It's an absolute mess. And we know the Saints will exploit Taysom Hill's skill set. So you can use him at the tight end position, which is a weird position anyway. You can use him in the flex. Taysom Hill, solid rest of season schedule. You play Atlanta, you play Green Bay, you play Vegas in the fantasy championship, you play the Rams. There are a couple spots in which I would really like to use Taysom Hill if he's available in my leagues or your leagues primarily. Let's close this out. We're going to add a quarterback. That's Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is playing better. He's finally looking acclimated or reacclimated with Devontae Adams. We know Garrett Wilson is having the best season of his career. Rodgers is not even, I don't even want to call him a streamer. I think you should roster Aaron Rodgers, number one, so nobody else can use him against you. And depending on who your quarterback is, there are some matchups in which I would use Aaron Rodgers over my quarterback. Look at guys like, if you're dependent on Flacco because you lost Richardson, I'd rather have Rodgers. Jameis Winston looked fun for a minute. I'd rather have Rodgers. People love Drake May. I'd rather have Rodgers. There are some cases where you might want to use Rodgers over Bo Nix after Bo Nix was exposed a little bit this week, and they're not really adding any more weapons. Jared Goff could be matchup dependent. I'd rather have Rodgers. If you had Dak, you want Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has now thrown for at least 2 touchdown passes in all but 3 games this year. And this past week against Houston, he threw for 3 against a tough defense. And now in the next few games going to the bye, you get Zona. You get the Colts coming out of the bye. You get Seattle, Jacksonville, the Rams, Buffalo. There are some nice spots here for Aaron Rodgers to click, and they have so many weapons on offense. If Aaron Rodgers keeps playing like this, right, he's going to be a high floor fantasy asset. Now, I don't see him putting together 25, 30-point weeks, right? He just doesn't throw for enough yards. But, if you tell me, hey, I'm going to give you a quarterback that's going to give me 225 yards and 2 touchdowns, give me about 20 points a week as a floor, I will absolutely take that at such a volatile position. We're going to wrap up. I'm Anthony Servino, Face Off Sports Network. This is my waiver wire pickups for week 10. We'll see.